Well, I mean, we are here at Babette's feast, and the theme is family. And I actually reread Babette's feast before I came here, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful story, but I freaked out a little bit because I thought, oh, I don't belong here with this book, because this is the center of this book. Is one of the main characters is a chef, a gourmet chef, and she also so much wants to make a party. She wants to make a birthday party for her 75-year-old mother, but nobody, least not the mother, wants her party. But she still wants to do the party because Siri, the chef in my book, has so much that has broken, and so much she feels, I think, she wants to make up for. And I think at a point in life, maybe we all have this, that we come to a place where we just want to make good. We have to do something to make it right, and she's going to make this party, but nobody wants to have the party. The mother doesn't want to have the party. So on her mother's 75th birthday, the mother begins drinking again after 20 years of sobriety. A young woman goes missing and is later found murdered. Siri's husband, who is a writer with writer's block and continually cheating on his wife, continues to have writer's block and cheats on his wife. And it's really a family falling apart, and the party, the centerpiece of the novel, is the place for all catastrophe, which is the opposite of Babette's feast, which is people coming together, drinking and eating good food and finding each other. So I was a little worried. And then I thought I would read about mothers and daughters, but then I thought, no, I will read about men and dogs. Because I thought, well, but then we already had a wonderful animal discussion here. Because I thought, okay, I'll do but John, the father in the story and the husband in the story, he's a novelist. He hasn't. He's writing a trilogy, and part 1 and part 2 went really well, and now he's writing part 3, and he's not writing. He's just sitting at his loft, his attic, and not writing anything. And the years go by. And he starts instead creating shadow worlds, because I think what happens when you give in to writer's block, and writers here will know this, if you start giving into it, it will turn on you. Your creativity will turn on you and become demonous. And that's what happens to John. And that's why I think he starts having these affairs. And the only one who knows that he's really messed up. Because what happens with writers, they can hide their writer's block for a long time, and they can, hide behind that. Well, anyway, it's the dog. And sometimes he does write on his computer, but then he's thinking about everything that's going wrong in his life, and especially about his children, and especially about his messed up daughter, 13-year-old daughter, who at one point in the book cuts off the hair of her teacher because, well, the hair is so long, so she cuts it off, snips it off, and, well, of course, that's a problem when kids cut off the hair of their teachers. Anyway, I'll just get Leopold. Here is the dog, named after Leopold Bloom. Leopold was every dog's revenge on mankind. It is humiliating not to be able to control your dog. It's a sign of weakness, lack of willpower, lack of perseverance. It proves that you're lazy, slothful, sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. Rather like a writer who doesn't write. But unlike a dog owner who can't control his dog, a writer who doesn't write can hide behind the excuse that he's thinking, that literature takes time. He can even allow himself a yawn or snigger of contempt at fellow authors who spew out a new book every year. John had used these very words himself just a few weeks ago when asked by a journalist why it was taking him so long to write part 3. Writer's block? Might the whole notion of a trilogy have been a mistake in the first place? The journalist was a young female summer temp named Charlotte. She had a PhD in literature and had had 2 collections of poetry published. John had decided in advance not to sleep with her. She was 27, had milky thighs, and a tattoo. But then he changed his mind. Her line of questioning was driving him crazy, and maybe if he fucked her, she'd shut up. Well, here's what I think, said Charlotte. I think there is something very contrived about the whole notion of a trilogy. I mean, this is something you decide on beforehand, along with your publisher, before you've even written a single word, possibly simply in order to sell more books, sell the idea of this very big literary event. And I guess what I'm asking is if your trilogy was motivated more by commercial concerns than literary ones. It is impossible to act as if everything is fine when the dog is straining at the leash and setting the pace and won't sit when you say sit and heel when you say heel. It is there for everyone to see. You've got no control over your dog. Ulysses' dog didn't question Ulysses' authority. Argos didn't tug and strain at the leash, but waited patiently for his owner for 10 long years, while Ulysses himself fought and won a lengthy war, and then slowly wended his way home to Ithaca. Homer, Shakespeare, Kafka, Pynchon, Verne, Poe, Steinbeck, they all wrote about dogs, literary dogs. But John's dog just strained at his leash and had no idea how to be a literary dog. John's dog had no idea of how to be a dog, period. The thing was, his daughter Alma had cut off a chunk of her teacher's hair. First Milla disappears, and then Alma cuts her teacher's hair off. John tried to block out the image of the teacher with hacked hair, a big nose, and red-rimmed eyes. Why, Alma? They had asked her again and again, and all she did was shrug or say, I don't know why. Her hair was just really long. It wasn't as if they hadn't talked to Alma about the difference between right and wrong, good and bad, white lies and black lies. Siri and John weren't bad parents. John wasn't a bad father. He loved his children. On his computer, he wrote, I want to write about fathers and daughters. And then he wrote, talk to her.
Linn, thank you. I want to ask you a question which I'm sure will interest at least the writers here. I know you have said that writer's block in small doses can be very fruitful and a very positive experience. If you could elaborate on that, I think many people here would be grateful.
Well, I think resistance in writing is a must. Resistance in anything is a must. I tell my writer students that, writer's block in big doses is very destructive, but continual inspiration, flow and flow and flow, is just as dangerous, because probably there's missing some, there might be missing some kind of resistance or some kind of door that you need to open and that you need to struggle with. So small amounts of writer's block, but then not to give into it. The only way to solve writer's block, I think you'd agree with me, is to write, which, like with insomnia, because writer's block and insomnia are very similar things, the only thing to solve insomnia is actually to go to bed at the same exact time and try to go to sleep.
Yeah. And to write,
and go to write at the exact same time and try to write, because if you don't, you won't sleep and you won't. But it seems impossible. It seems impossible. It's like being bullied at work when you have writer's block.
But you have had the experience of, after a series of novels, all of a sudden a period of 5 or 6 years lapsed before your next novel. And not that one has to publish a novel every year, God forbid, but it must have been a new experience for you.
Well, this took a little longer because, like many people in this novel, I was turning a corner in my life. My father had just died, and I had lost him, and with him a whole story and my family around there, and this is something that most people will experience or experiences, and also the place where he lived. And so this sense of loss and questioning. I heard a writer once said, and I can't remember, I think it was Anne Enright. She was in a panel like this. And she said, you know, there are so many books about the beginning of life or the beginning of love or the beginning, and there's so many books about the end. She said, I'd really like to read or write a book about how to proceed. And that's a little bit where I was at. And when you're at a point like that, it's a little... You don't want to write about harmony, but it's nice to be a little bit harmonious when you do write. Because if you're going to write about disharmony, not being in disharmony yourself at that exact moment would be a good thing.
Anyone? Yeah, thank you. I think it was a very constructive thing that you also spent your time recreating at the center at Farø. I think that's an amazing and wonderful thing you've done.
There's an artist retreat, so for writers, come to
I think it's so great.
I do have a question over here, if I may. It is not directly about writer's block, nor is it about animals. Linn, I loved your reading. It was very beautiful, intriguing, but even more so, I loved your framing of what you were going to read and how you sort of juxtaposed the two poles of hosting a dinner party, one that succeeds and one that fails. And it made me very acutely think about two very famous heroines of Virginia Woolf's. Mrs. Ramsay has a very long scene towards the first part of her novel, To the Lighthouse, where Mrs. Ramsay is finally trying to bring everybody together. It's a very big family with a lot of house guests, a lot of complicated house guests, and that you really get this feel of the ebbs and the flows of hosting, and how there can be flows and blocks to that process, and how maybe the very act or art of hosting has something to do with narrative. And of course also a lot to do about being a virtuous woman. And then I thought about another Woolf heroine, Mrs. Dalloway. There's a whole long novel building up to a big evening party of this woman who is reaching sort of the end of her middle age. You were talking about proceeding, not always focusing on youth or old age, and also how she's struggling. You know, you really again get this feeling that hosting is an art, but it's also some kind of battlefield where certain moments have to be conquered, and social energy has to be streamed and channeled in the right way. So I would be very interested to ask you, and maybe also our other hostesses here, Susanne, who's hosting tonight's dinner, and Judith, who was hosting a dinner earlier this week, and very beautifully so, I know. Could you talk a little bit about the art of hosting and what it has to do with being a good girl and with telling a good story?
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful question.
Would you?
Well, Karen Blixen says the hostess asks one thing: to be thanked. So you do. It's. I never get to enjoy my own dinner parties because I'm too busy cooking and making sure that everybody's glass is full and the food is on time, and I don't mind that because that's your identity for the evening. You choose it. You take upon the mantle of entertaining, and you don't expect to be taken care of. You are the caretaker. So it's a parenting role.
Well, I think it's a special privilege to be a hostess at such a dinner where you get so much help from the writers present and from all of you. And I think as a hostess, you don't have to be good, but you have to be... No, that's a Winnicott. No. You have to be real. And that's why the next writer I'm going to present, I know he's a bit embarrassed about having to read something a bit grim, but I can tell you, before you hear Sean's story, that the last words of the dinner will come from the host, the real hostess, from Isaac Dinesen herself. But let me say something about Sean, which really has impressed me. I mean, all of us Nordic writers, we are of course jealous of the Icelanders. Because they are so close to the roots of their tradition. And they have the Eddas, they have the sagas, and they can read them and they can understand them. And I mean, we can hardly understand Shakespeare. And so this is this tradition of this great literature is alive in some Icelandic writers today. And let me just quote what A.S. Babette wrote in the New York Review of Books, where she called Sean a Magus of the North. And she says, every now and then a writer changes the whole map of literature inside my head. The most recent has been the Icelander, Sean. Voilà.